Hello and welcome to Dish Shelved with Adam White. I've got a couple of different things for you today. Just kind of a grab bag of what I've been reading. The first thing is I've been reading Joanna Russ. I read the complete Alex stories out of this. It's a series of short stories that all deal with the character of Alex that uh, the stories revolve around. Actually, um, the first three stories, Blue Stocking, I thought she was afeared till she stroked my beard, and The Barbarian were all almost kind of sword and sorcery. I know you're probably tired of hearing that after the last couple of videos I put up, but they were actually pretty much sword and sorcery. I mean, not to an extreme extent, but um, in the first story is kind of a pirate story almost, and the second one is too. They both take place on ships, and it's the first one is Alex uh, taking this one woman who wants to get away from an arranged marriage and going to a completely different place on a ship, and the girl starts out not wanting to go on the ship, and so she has to kind of learn as she goes along how to deal with being on a ship and what you have to do to keep it going, and only with two of them on there. And the second one, which has a funny title, I thought she was afeared till she stroked my beard, is kind of an origin story for Alex. I won't go too much into it because it's a really fun story, and you kind of see how she got her start, and she's good with swords, and uh, there is some light sorcery. There's some more sorcery in the third one, the Barbarian, uh, about a world maker, someone who is kind of a self-proclaimed god, and she goes up against him, and it's a really fun story. But then on the fourth story, Picnic on Paradise, it completely changes to a science fiction survival story. I mean, it just out of nowhere, she all of a sudden she's in the future on another planet, and it's an existentialist survival story, and it's pure sci-fi, but it works. She you find out loosely that she has become part of some kind of temporal agency where they send people throughout time to do things. And I mean, this is a complete 180 from what the first three stories were, but it works. And she's still the same character, and she's learning to exist in a future time on a harsh planet. And it was a little bit longer of a story. I'd say it's a short novella, but it was really good. It just was a fantastic story. The last two stories, The Second Inquisition and A Game of Vlet, didn't have Alex in them, so I don't know why they're called part of the complete Alex stories. They take place in the same universe. One of them involves the temporal agency, but it's kind of a suburban, a suburban life story, which is kind of strange. And the last one has supernatural elements to it too. As these two people uh, use this game of let to change things in reality, and I won't go too much into it because it's fun how it how it plays out. But neither one of them have Alex in the story. And that surprises me. And didn't understand why they were part of the Alex stories, other than the fact that they take place in the same universe. The last one, A Game of Let, takes place in the same city that she was in one of the earlier stories. And but anyway, that is just part of the Joanna Russ Library of America collection. I'm really looking forward to reading more of her work in this. Uh, the Alex stories were fantastic. Don't get me wrong; those last two stories I liked. I just didn't understand why they didn't have Alex in them. I've really enjoyed the character, and I was disappointed that she wasn't in more stories than that. But those are the only ones there are. So I really highly recommend this edition of Library of America of Joanna Russ. Uh, the Alex stories were great, and I'm looking forward to reading uh, the other stories and novels in this volume. Now, the next thing I read, which is almost completely different, is Beowulf. I've read it before, of course, several times, but I wanted to read it again. Again, I would venture to say that this would be the first sword and sorcery story in history, uh, because I mean, I'm sure everybody's probably familiar with it or had to read it in school and probably didn't want to, but when I read it in school, it was actually one of the only stories I actually enjoyed that I read from the selection of books that we had. And I really enjoyed it. And because it had that sword and sorcery feel to it, and it's got Beowulf who shows up to fight Grendel uh, at a king's hall, and he says that, I mean, he's a great warrior, but he's going to leave his sword and shield and uh, chainmail and everything away and face Grendel basically unarmed, because he says Grendel doesn't use weapons. And so he's not going to use weapons or anything like that either. Well, it turns out Grendel's got a sorcery on him that makes him immune to the weapons, so they wouldn't have done him any good anyway. So when Beowulf fights him, and Grendel's just been causing all sorts of trouble, killing all these people, and uh, I think eating them too. And so it's just been a real bad time of it. And Beowulf hears of this from across the sea and comes to take care of it because he's such a mighty warrior and he's kind of full of himself, I think. And he's like, I'm going to take him on hand to hand myself. And he does. And he rips Grendel's arm off, essentially beating him to death with it. And I mean, I'm not blowing anything here. It's the story itself is only about 52 pages. It was originally a poem, and you can get it in translation to modern English as a poem or as a prose story. And I got this one that's a prose story. I'm actually kind of curious to read uh, a poetry translation of it, because some places it's kind of hard to tell whether they're discussing, uh, they're just telling a story, or if it's something that actually happened to them that they're relating to the other characters. And sometimes that's not so clear. It does require close reading, because it's, you know, a translation from the older English into the modern. But it's really worth your time to do it. This edition is Norton Critical, so it has all sorts of extra essays and stuff about Beowulf uh, to help you understand it. And I thought that was a really cool addition. And it's got this really neat cover. And anyway, Beowulf takes care of Grendel and is like, the king and everyone is like, oh, you're the best warrior and we're going to celebrate you and everything. Well, then Grendel's mother comes into the equation and starts doing the same thing Grendel did. So he's like, well, I'm going to have to take care of this monster too. And he follows back to her lair, which is under a lake, and has a fight with her. Then it skips ahead in time. He goes back to Beowulf goes back to his home across the sea, and time passes, and all sorts of other people that are king there die, and he becomes their king. And then he has to take on a dragon, which is another kind of sword and sorcery staple, would be a dragon. So, and I won't say much about what happens with the dragon, but he has a young warrior Wiglaf that uh, comes to help him, and when no one else would, because everybody's scared of the dragon, and they know that they don't know how they're going to stop the dragon from attacking everybody. And Beowulf is, of course, like, well, even though he's like, 50 years older than he was, he's like, I'll just have to take care of this dragon. So you have to read it to find out if he does. But Beowulf is a classic for a reason. It's a really good story. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it does take careful reading. You can't just kind of breeze through it. But it's a really good story. If you're into sword and sorcery at all, I would argue this is probably the first thing that was sword and sorcery. Usually, when you hear talk about it, it's Robert E. Howard and uh, people in the pulps that created it, and really they did in the modern sense of the sword and sorcery. But I still maintain this is the first. Uh, and I think if you have any interest at all in sword and sorcery, that you should give this a read. Now, I know I'm running along here in time. I really want to talk about A Harvest of Hoodwinks by Robert Laurie. I just finished this. It's a collection of short stories. They were excellent. Really, all of them are fairly short stories, so you can get through them quickly. You can read a few and then come back to it later, or you can go through all of them at once like I did. Now, they all have this notion of being hoodwinked in it that he does to you in the story, and they have kind of a twist ending to some of them, and or just a surprise ending to some of them, and to all of them really. And you really don't know what you're going to get at the end, and the way the stories play out may even be like like I said, in the Alex stories, they had the one that was like almost a suburban life kind of story, but then it turned out it had something to do with the temporal agency. And with A Harvest of Hoodwinks, it they all have a kind of a surprise ending, and it really, really good stories. Um, each story has an introduction by the author, and it always tells you a little bit. He's like kind of talking to the reader directly, and I thought that was a fun little addition to the stories. Archimedes' Lever was kind of a science fiction story. Uh, it was, I can't say much about them because, like I said, they're all short, and they all have surprises, so I can't say much without ruining anything. But Archimedes' Lever was a really clever little story. Uh, Martian, which is kind of a split up version of Martian. That was a fun story. The Star Party was probably my favorite story just because of the ending. It's about these people that I think the guy worked at an ad agency maybe, and they go to kind of a high society party, him and his wife, and they encounter a guy there that does like horoscopes and stuff because everybody believes in the horoscopes and on this earth, and they find something strange about him, but then he finds something strange about them, and you get down to the very last line of the story, and it's just so good. It I really enjoyed the Star Party. The whole collection's worth it for that. I mean, all the stories are really good, but the Star Party was a really good, just had a perfect ending. I thought it was great. Futility is Zuck. That was also, if these are all pretty much science fiction stories. It was pretty good. It was dealing with whether something should be done by robots or by humans, and it plays out in a strange way. Snowbird and his seven dwarfs. That was a story way ahead of its time. Uh, it's about a reality TV show that broadcasts all across the universe, and this guy ends up on Earth to do the show and picks an unsuspecting guy named, his last name is Snowbird. He was a Native American, and it takes place in New York City, I think it was. And he uh, he's unwittingly part of the show that does strange things to you when you don't answer the questions correctly. And it just, I mean, it's a story that could appear today as is, and you'd think, this is just a perfect story for today with the fascination with reality TV shows. There's also The Locator. Appointment at 10 o'clock was a real interesting one. Oh, and the way Snowbird ends is really funny too. I want to say that that's another great ending. Uh, which, because the whole time this Snowbird guy is just trying to get to meet this woman for a date, and he is interrupted by this reality science fiction reality show, and all he really wants to do is get to his date, and then the way that it ends is really funny and really appropriate and really of this time. Appointment at 10 o'clock, very good one. It has kind of a Groundhog's Day feel to it, the movie Groundhog's Day. You probably know what that is. But it's funny the way it ends up too. Only a God is a really good story. Uh, it it just kind of has a couple of different twists to it, and what why people worship what they worship. The Fall of All Father, Because of Purple Elephants, and Rolling Robert are all three really good stories. Just science fictiony, with uh, again with sort of surprise endings. And then the last one is called Debut, and it again is like a kind of a welcome to society for this young girl, but it turns out really different than what you're expecting. And it's a really, really interesting story. Again, it's not very long, but he does so much with such a few pages in each one of these stories. Robert Laurie really is a fantastic author. Uh, he just he doesn't use, like I said, none of the stories are real long, but they are really, really good. And he really gets you with the ending every time. It's actually an ace double with a Masters of the Lamp. I think it's a novel by him. Uh, um, Let me see here. Yeah, chapter one. It's a novel, but I'm looking forward to reading that. But I've started with The Harvest of Hoodwinks. It's the first thing I've read by him. I have a few things on Kindle by him too. I'm looking forward to reading them all. Uh, Really, really entertaining stories. Like I said, this is an old ace double. You'll have to get it secondhand, but it wasn't very expensive. So you should be able to get a hold of it. And I'd highly, highly recommend it. Really good stories, really fun endings. Several of them, like I said, had endings that just really made the whole story. And I really, really enjoyed this book of short stories. So I've kept you long enough this time. I will see you again at some point. I've got a few ideas for what I'm going to do next, but I wanted to talk about these books and because these are what I've been reading lately. So I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was kind of rambling, but if you've seen my videos, you know that's what they're all about, is just me rambling about books. So I hope you got something enjoyment out of it. And I recommend all three of those books: Joanna Russ, the Library of America edition that collects all her work, Beowulf, and A Harvest of Hoodwinks. Check them out. You'll not be disappointed by any of them. And I will see you when I see you.